Right, welcome everyone to the third of today's webinars, and today is on the National Burial Grounds Survey, and you're very welcome. So all week this week we're doing a whole series of webinars themed around lots of different aspects of land and nature, because it's currently Churches Count on Nature. And we've got well over 300 churches all around the country who are taking part in Churches Count on Nature, and they're out doing biological recording and finding out about the wonderful nature that lives in their churchyards. And we here centrally at the Church of England are doing our whole programme of webinars. Let me click on. So let me click on, there we go. So this shows you the whole webinar programme for the week. We are on number 3, the National Burial Grounds Survey. You can see there's lots still to come this week. So if you spot something there that you're not booked into and you like the look of, please do click through. I'll put the link in the chat when I've finished. And then also on Saturday, Sheffield Diocese is hosting an online eco-church festival linked to the Churches Count on Nature. I'll put the link to that in the chat as well when I've finished. It would be lovely to see you there. And looking slightly further ahead, these are a few of the other webinars that we've got coming up over the next few months. We have a session on heat pumps, a little bit different from land and nature, but very important. We've got 3 different webinars about eco-church, and we have our fundraising webinars in September, specifically on environmental fundraising, what opportunities are out there and how to go about fundraising. So turning back to today, you might well have come to one of my webinars before. I'm Catherine Ross. I am based in the Cathedral and Church Buildings Division, and I'm one of the staff that runs the Church of England's Environment Programme. And more importantly, our guest speaker today, Dr. Jo Elders, who is the Head of Church Buildings Strategy in the Cathedral and Church Buildings Division, and has, I think this project that you're telling us about today has been a passion of yours for many years, and it's so exciting to be able to hear about you bringing it to fruition. So if I stop sharing my screen and hand over to you, Jo, oh, I haven't done my housekeeping bit. How did that slide not come out? My housekeeping bit is to say that we are using the Q&A for questions today rather than the chat. So please do find the Q&A down the bottom. That's where to put your questions. You'll see other people's questions there, and you can click the thumbs up next to them. The questions that come to the top are the ones that Jo and I will take first when he's finished speaking. We are recording this webinar, and in a few days' time, you'll find that link on our website. It will take a few days though, because we've got 12 webinars this week. And after we've finished, it probably won't be till tomorrow morning now, I will send round the slides to everybody, along with any links that are shared in the chat and a link through to our feedback form. Now this time it really is it from me. So over to you, Jo, to share your screen and lead us off.
Thank you, Catherine. Let's see if we can get the technology to work. Always a moment of doubt.
Looking good.
Can you see that? It hasn't come up yet in its full glory, but I'm sure it will.
It's thinking about it very hard.
It's thinking about it very hard. It's probably far too big because it's got so many pretty pictures in it. There we are. Okay. Thank you very much, Catherine, for that introduction. You can all hear me, I hope. Thumb up again if you can hear me. You can hear me. Okay. As Catherine said, I'm Jo Elders. I've been working for the National Church Institutions for 22 years. All that time for the Cathedral and Church Buildings Division. And I have to confess that I started life here as an archaeologist. That's my profession. That's what I trained in. That's what my PhD is in. And I was brought in as first ever archaeology officer for the Church of England. And I think the challenges that I had there are similar to those that many of my colleagues in the world of environmental protection are facing now, in that there wasn't great understanding about the archaeology of churches and churchyards, and we worked very hard to get that understanding of the significance of our churches and churchyards in that respect sort of bedded into the system, and it worked. And I think the Church of England now is pretty good at archaeology. But where we wanted to start from, or where I wanted to start from, was actually being able to understand what we had nationally before we did any projects that were, if you like, regional or local, to give some sort of a mesh for people's efforts. Because of course, you have people working at Church House in London, but the real work is done out there in the dioceses and parishes. So could we help dioceses and parishes to get to grips with both the historic and natural environment of their churches and churchyards? What could we do to help with that? The first project I was actually entrusted with back in 1999 was called the very nascent Church Heritage Record, which is my subtitle there. Now, the ambition there was to produce the first sort of map and database of all our churches. It was originally thought of as churches rather than churches and churchyards, although the brief for churches includes churchyards. Because we had a basic problem. If you look at the slide on my left, you look at the slide with the two colours, pink and blue, that is pretty much what we knew about the Church of England when I arrived. We had two provinces, Canterbury and York. You can see those, York at the top, Canterbury at the bottom. And we had 40 odd dioceses, depending on how you counted them. That number has changed since I started. And we knew where the boundaries of those were. And we knew roughly how many churches, although we had no idea how many churchyards, were swimming around on that map, somewhat unmoored. But we had no real way of locating them. And we certainly had no relational database which allowed us to manage this vast resource. We thought we had about 16,000 churches. We thought we had about 2,000 closed churches, and we had a large number of churches that had been ruined or lost in the past, but we weren't really clear how many of those we had either. And as casework officers zooming around the country, I was one of those back then, if we wanted to work out how to get to a church, we would look up its name, roughly which county it was in, which sort of area we thought it was, and then we'd go to our filing cabinet, we'd get our fantastic Ordnance Survey map out, fill that out, which is actually, it's a very pleasurable, tactile thing to do that has perhaps got lost in our digital world, but that's what you had to do. You folded it out and you pored over that map till you found your church, and then you would try and find the nearest motorway to it, etc., etc. There was no Google really to, just show you directly the way. There was certainly no sat-nav in your car. So that's what you had to do to work out how to get to an individual church. So we looked back then at how we might make some sort of map of the parish churches of the Church of England. But every time we did it, we came to an astronomical sum to be able to achieve that, which really involved sending people out in cars to mark the church, record the church, and then glue all that later into some sort of database. The technology really wasn't there to do it. So it got put on the shelf. There was a very nice report. The Church of England is very good at producing great big thick reports. That doesn't always lead to action, as those of you who know this organization will know. But the big thick report stayed gathering dust on my shelf and then under my desk for some years. Then about 7 years ago, we got the opportunity with very generous help from English Heritage to start to build that database as the technology started to catch up. The driver for it was providing an online planning system, the online faculty system for the Church of England. So I kind of leapt on that opportunity to give me the chance to put together a map of all the churches of England in the first place. So the middle map that you can see there, with that mass of red crosses, is basically like a Google lollipop map of all our churches. Most of the data from that came from English Heritage, who had their listing descriptions, which had moved from the paper greenbacks, if any of you remember those, to being online. So we actually compared the codes that we had for our churches to the English Heritage codes. And all of a sudden we were able to produce this fantastic bright red map where every cross, rather than a lollipop, is an individual church. You can click on that and up comes a record of the basic things we know about that church. And it links to what is now the Historic England, the NHLE, and various other websites. So that was a very basic thing we were able to do quite quickly. Took us about a year to build that system. And it was a very good start. But of course, it was only point data. It showed you the middle point, if you like, of each church building. It didn't show you anything around the church or any land characterizations around it. it was pretty basic. But it was a good start. If you've not looked at the Church Heritage Record, please have a look after this talk and have a play with it. It allows you to search for all sorts of things. You can look and see how many grade 1 listed churches there are in the Diocese of Hereford or Truro or anywhere you want. You can look at churches at risk. And increasingly, as we add data sets to it, you can start to look for natural assets and natural designations. Although we're still in the infancy here, and this is what we're trying to build up now, so that this database becomes not just buildings, but everything around a building and everything pertaining to it. So having done that basic map, our next stage was to map all our churchyards and burial grounds. So we set out to map churchyards, detached extensions to those churchyards, and also municipal cemeteries which had consecrated parts, everything that belonged to the Church of England, basically, in terms of burial and churchyards. We did have an ambition to, one second, Catherine is ready. We did have an ambition to capture all the burial grounds of all of the denominations and faiths, and we made a beginning with that, but that we found that was going to take us too long. So we only managed to map about the 1/8 of the country before we decided we had to concentrate on Anglican burial grounds, but we have those records, and we're hoping to move that forward with our colleagues. So the white map on the right, every dot there represents an individual shapefile of every burial ground of ours in England. That was a Herculean task. It became possible just a couple of years ago when the fantastic Ordnance Survey made green space data free to the public, which is an amazingly generous thing to have done. So we had what they thought were the burial grounds of England on there. We found that it included pet cemeteries and all sorts of classes of burial ground which were not ours, or that perhaps we wouldn't normally consider as burial grounds. But it was a very good start. But we had consultants, again with support from Historic England, who ploughed through that data, worked out which ones were which, what they were, whether they were open for burial or closed, and a host of other data. So that was a monumental task. And actually, my wife did a bit of it. And she said if I ever asked her to do anything like that again, she would divorce me and never speak to me again, because it was just so much backbreaking work. But we're very proud of it. We came up with 18,000 burial grounds, including just over 12,000 Church of England churchyards. So we have a massive data now that we can interrogate. Before you get too excited, you can't go and look at it yet, because we're actually building the functionality into the Church Heritage Record that will allow all that to be searchable. And when we've done that, we can really talk about the National Burial Ground Survey as a thing, because you'll be able to see it. At the moment, it's all in the computer. It's not quite visible to the public, but it will be very shortly, I promise you. So having established those two Herculean tasks of where all our churches are and now all our churchyards with the church sitting within it, we can start to add all sorts of data. Usually we don't create that data. We look to partner organizations, I'll talk about a few of them later, who can help us with that. And we see that our database and our GIS map here as being a backdrop that people can add to, something that people can link to, a one-stop shop for looking at everything about a church and churchyard. So I'll see now if I can be successful in moving on to the next slide. There we are. So one of the issues, one of the reasons we set out on this massive task of working out where all our churchyards were and all our burial grounds were and what might be in them, is that, as many of you will know, our churchyards and cemeteries are in many cases neglected. Not always. Some of them are in excellent condition. So the one on the right is in very good condition, and the one on the left is somewhat overgrown. However, that has its advantages, as you all know. And sometimes they are endangered. So there are burial grounds that are overgrown in a bad way, or are subject to development, or not protected in any number of ways. And what we do know about them, though, is that they are a critically important potential resource. And we've had lots of sort of little sound bites, like the fact that all our churchyards added together added up to a national park. Well, now we've actually got the data to prove that. They do add up to a small national park, not quite as small as the smallest, but it's getting there. And we know exactly how many hectares. I think it worked out as something like 60 square miles of God's acre across the whole country, putting them all together. So a huge resource that I think is worth mapping, because the mapping allows you to do all sorts of clever things, as I hope to show. When you get to an individual church and you want to look at what's there, whether it's who's buried where, or what resources there might be, what might be of interest in a churchyard, either historical or natural, what you will often find is that the records that individual parishes have look something like this in many cases. Although most parish churches are required to have a burial ground map, actually very few of them have. And when they do, they're often in pretty poor condition. They often date to the 19th century. Here's some examples of what they might look like. One of them looks rather like Dead Sea Scroll or something. They can be pieced together, but sometimes it's scarcely worth it. Next slide. And also our registers and records, our books and like this, are often kept in a church warden's attic. We've found ones that were under the sink. If they haven't been taken to the record office because they're still in use, they can often be in a very parlous and dangerous condition. And these are really priceless resources. You can see they, even if they're kept well, they can disintegrate. And that would be a great loss. So what do we do? The combination of these factors, neglect, lack of knowledge, lack of resource, lack of understanding, lack of any form of active management in many cases, even in quite big municipal cemeteries in some cases, means that we have this fragile, dispersed resource. The information that we do have is difficult to access, difficult or impossible to update, and that makes recording and the protection and management of our burial grounds difficult, to say the least. So we have here a chap in a burial ground trying to work out where he is and if he can fit any more people in. And of course, you can see there that there's a great deal going on in the background of that picture. So many of our churchyards and cemeteries are, of course, a huge ecological resource as well as a place to bury people. And all of that can be at risk of poor management or simple neglect. So the National Burial Ground Survey, what does it actually consist of? Apart from creating digital maps, what have we done? So the shapefile map of all the burial grounds is the first phase, what I talked about before. So we can establish the size and nature of the resource. So here are the Yorkshire Anglican dioceses. So you've got Sheffield on the left, Leeds in the middle, and York on the right. And you can see a little excerpt from the city of York showing all the burial grounds there in the bottom right-hand corner of that. So that's sort of what it looks like in detail. Each dot and blob is a shapefile, which allows you, if you know about shapefiles, to drop anything you like within that defined space. So you can put point data within the shapefiles, and of course you can compare it with other records. So that part is done, and that allows you to then zoom in phase 2, now that that map is complete, actually on the ground. So we have signed a contract, the Church of England has signed a contract with a surveying company called Atlantic Geomatics, who are based up in Cumbria and cut their teeth in Carlisle Diocese. We went to see what they were doing with Carlisle Diocese and were very impressed indeed with their product. They've developed a software package for recording churchyards in detail. And you can see there, there is a young man with a fantastic looking Doctor Who rucksack, which is full of lasers and cameras, which work in tandem to simply record everything within the churchyard. Now, myself as an archaeologist, I know about recording things like this. And in my day, you had to have one person operating a theodolite, someone else writing down the numbers that they were reading, and then you had somebody else walking around with the staff. So you had at least 3 people. It was an incredibly tedious exercise and hugely time intensive, which is why when we looked into this in 1999, we kept coming up with these sums for doing this work in the millions. This the surveyor by themselves just walks around the churchyard. It looks like they're having a nice stroll. I'm sure there's more to it than that, but they record everything in the churchyard in a matter of under an hour normally for a regular sized churchyard. So they can capture several churchyards in a day. They can also go inside and record the inside of the church. We did about 50 pilots with churches in England and also in Wales. And of course, Atlantic Geomatics had to charge the parishes for that, and we didn't get very far. We didn't get that many parishes signing up for obvious reasons. People don't have the money. So after some negotiations, we now have an arrangement whereby the initial survey and the actual basic map is provided for free. And it will be rolled out diocese for diocese, which is the only way it's cost effective, with one diocese being completely surveyed and then the next diocese being completely surveyed after that. All that parishes have to do to take part in the survey is not stop the surveyors when they come with their Ghostbusters van and Doctor Who backpack, but let them in, let them into the church if possible, and also to sign a chit and take any records that may be held in the church or in the church warden's house or wherever they might be, take them to the record office, get them digitized, and then bring them back. So that's all you have to do. In some circumstances, Atlantic Geomatics may ask for some cutting of grass or removal of weeds, and one has to be very careful with that, of course. And that can be discussed a case-by-case basis, but it's not an absolute necessity. No one has to do anything. It's just a case of don't stop them, and the survey will happen. So you can see in the middle, the sort of point cloud that is created by this surveying in 3 dimensions. So that gives you the basis for doing all sorts of clever things. But the basic product on the right is this interactive plan, which is a clickable plan. You can click on each grave, as I'll show in a minute, and show what's there. And you can also click on a tree, and it will tell you what kind of tree that is, so whether it's a veteran tree, and if there's any other wildlife of note in the churchyard, that can also be recorded. Not everything will be recorded by Atlantic Geomatics because they're just making the plan. It requires volunteers and experts to add the detail onto that. So the next stage after they've done that, as I say, they scan the registers, they then link them to the individual graves and to a photograph of the memorials. And now again, big breakthroughs in technology mean that we no longer have to have someone with a brush and, heaven forbid, chemicals cleaning off old gravestones so that you can read the inscriptions and some of the imagery on them. We can now use various types of technology. The most commonly used is called reflectance transformation imaging, which allows you can see in examples A, B, C, D, what you can do with that. So that gravestone covered in lichen, you don't have to scrape anything off, you don't have to do anything. The technology does it for you, and it's free. It's freeware you can download off the web, and you simply, if you like, filter your digital photographs through this program and it will do that for you, which is extraordinary stuff. So we no longer have to have destructive cleaning of gravestones if that was ever done. Then records are transcribed, matched with the monuments. So what you get at the end of that is this digital plan showing you where everybody's buried, and as I said before, where anything else you care to record might be in the churchyard. Now, I said it was free, and it is free. The basic map is free, and you can do this basic clicking and looking who's buried where, etc., and what information has been collected. Now, each participating PCC or cemetery manager in this who uses the system which sits behind this map, the burial grounds management system, which Atlantic Geomatics runs, they can then add things to this map. So they can use it as an active management tool to, if you like, reserve grave spaces, or for volunteers to start to add more layers of information beyond the basic stuff recorded in the survey, as they will. So they can use this map for community projects, for school projects. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. That can all be added. And through various methods, volunteer information can be validated by experts. Now that does cost some money. So there's a subscription to the management system that PCCs would have to pay. I'm not going to talk about the money because I'm not involved in it, but it's not a large amount of money. But it does mean that the free service is getting some money back. And it does allow you to do an awful lot of very clever things. And of course, people from Atlantic Geomatics will do a little trial for you, show you what you would get for your money, and you can make a decision. We have nothing to do with that. That's a decision for you at the local level, whether you want to do that or not, or whether you just want the basic clickable plan. So that's how the 2 phases of this project worked. As I said, phase 1 is complete. Phase 2 is now being rolled out with the ground survey in dioceses that have so far volunteered to take part. So Carlisle is in the lead because they were the diocese this project was born from, if you like. Oh, I've skipped one. Go back. Okay, so I've talked a lot about recording gravestones, although I've mentioned obviously all the other things you can record, but we can record anything within a churchyard. So we can map biodiversity using these tools. And behind the scenes, we are working with a number of partners, Caring for God's Acre, Woodlands Trust with their Ancient Trees Inventory, the National Biodiversity Network with their Atlas, the Bats in Churches project, and a number of others, and with Natural England and with Historic England, who are still very supportive. We're working with them all to join our data sets together. So our map we see as the glue for everything to do with churches, but we don't want to be imperialistic and own everything. We don't want to integrate everything. We can simply link to other people's often more sophisticated databases and just provide that glue so that people can know if they go to the Church Heritage Record, which we now want to change the name of. I'll come back to that because it's doing so much. They can go there, they know that will provide a base for them to find other stuff about churches and churchyards. And that's our ambition really, is just to be helpful because it's also good for us, because it helps us to manage our churches and churchyards responsibly and to do all sorts of interesting things with them, because we think at the moment they are a sleeping giant, a wasted resource. So this is for the National Biodiversity Network Atlas. So someone spotted a grey squirrel in a churchyard of a Church of England church, Belgrave St. Peter. And there's some information on there. So that's all free. You can go and look at that. And we are working on joining our databases, as I said, together with all these other fantastic databases so that you can flit from one to the other and find the data that you need. The Woodland Trust has veteran trees inventory, so we've been working with them. So that shows you the veteran trees that can be found within churchyards and some details about them. And again, this data is at the moment being built into the Church Heritage Record, and sometime in the autumn will all appear. And what they will allow you to do is to see exactly where each individual veteran tree is within each individual churchyard. And of course, you won't just see the tree. You'll be able to see anything else that's been recorded in that, whether it be an Anglo-Saxon cross, which is a scheduled monument, whether it's a bat roost, roosting in the church or in the churchyard, whether it's some kinds of flowers, whatever it may be, and of course all the people buried there. You'll have all those things in one place. And then you will click on whatever it is you like, whether it's the veteran tree you're interested in, and go off to their website, the Woodland Trust website, and find out more about that. So again, we see what we're doing as a sort of clearinghouse, bringing everything together, and then people can see all the stuff they're interested in one place, and that helps everybody involved. And again, Church Heritage Record is free to use, so we're very happy for people to use it, and we know that people are, but we're trying to get it out there a bit more so that the more people know about it, the more people who are happy to work with us, the better we can develop our resources and be helpful to everybody else in the common interest of protecting this fantastic stuff that we've been entrusted with. So what you will do to get in, I've mentioned the Church Heritage Record many times. You can see what it looks like at the moment on the left. So you would basically click on church and churchyard that you want. If a plan has already been created by Atlantic Geomatics, you will see that. that will be in the middle, and there's a certain amount of functionality you can then look at with that. And then if you happen to be a PCC or somebody else who has the right to make additions or changes to that churchyard plan, you click on the right, you enter your login details, and you will be able to get in and start to change the plan. That would mean you'd subscribe to it, or you had some kind of other access. So that would be the basic process of moving from one of these websites to another. And as I say, there'll be all sorts of websites where we'll be clicking through to join them. That's how the basic system will work. I mean, one of the reasons for having, of course, the password protected access to the churchyard plans is you don't want anybody just going on and putting stuff on that might be wrong, or they might be, you know, a hacker, and they might put all sorts of awful stuff on. So everything that goes on is controlled, and we want to put in ways of verifying that, working with Caring for God's Sake and other colleagues. For example, it could be possible that one might find a completely unknown 14th century effigy in the long grass when it's being managed, and you know, that could be added. You could tell Historic England about that. You know, we can get that information into the right databases. The right people can find out about it as volunteers explore their churchyards. So we no longer think that Church Heritage Record is a really accurate name, as I've said before, for what we're trying to create here. And we asked a number of people for ideas, and we're still doing that. We haven't completely hit on this title, but the winner at the moment seems to be Sanctuary, which I think does capture a lot of what we're trying to do, because churchyards are sanctuaries for the natural environment, for the historic environment. The fact that they've been looked after by local people for a very singular purpose for so long has protected them and made them almost unique repositories of all these things. So we think sanctuary could be a good name. And because that doesn't actually tell you what it does, you then need a strap line after that with a very long-winded description, something like a GIS database of the natural and historic environment of churches and burial grounds. So a snappy title and then something telling you what it actually does. But if someone shouts and says that's the name of something they've developed, then we'll maybe change our minds. We don't want to tread on anyone's toes, but I like that name. So I'm doing all right for time. So in terms of using the system, so there's the burial ground management system, which I've talked about, which you can subscribe to or otherwise gain access to. And then you can start to add things to these fantastic maps, whatever it is you want to add. And Atlantic Geomatics can organize training sessions for you. That might be pro bono to some extent, but of course they're a business, so they will want paying for that. Or there are other voluntary societies and groups out there who can help volunteers to get to grips with what they've got in their churchyard and explain it, work out what it is, and record it and overlay on the basic map. So here we have some volunteers doing exactly that in pre-COVID times. Let's hope that we can soon be doing this kind of thing again and not having to stand 2 meters apart. That obviously COVID has delayed the rollout of the National Burial Ground Survey. We would have started with the ground survey in earnest by now, but we haven't been able to because of COVID. So we're hoping to be able to start in June, and hopefully we can have happy scenes like this again with people out in the summer sunshine, enjoying the open spaces of their churchyards for all sorts of purposes. And you had the Forest Church presentation before, showing how these assets can be used. With a nice picture, you know, obviously you can develop resources for school children who are always fascinated with these spaces. If you can tell those stories, if you can bring out the interest of what's in the churchyard, it's a fantastic tool. And it doesn't have to be children. You can see at the other end of the spectrum, we've got a group of retired ladies there who are bashing the data into their laptops and creating a fantastic resource and having a good time while they're doing it. So we're very much hopeful that the professionally produced database and maps will be the catalyst for volunteer interaction on the ground locally with churchyards to really use them for the community purposes. The worst thing is if a churchyard is shut off or inaccessible in some way. That's a real waste. So we hope that this project can be the part of the catalyst for that sort of opening up and enjoyment of our churchyards. Again, we have some children enjoying, actually the bright red thing at the bottom there is a drone. Drones are not used much by this project except in particular circumstances. I often refer to them as sort of surveying bling. You don't need them really for the recording of the churchyards because there are problems with drones. You can't see through the tree cover. There are lots of things getting in the way. You can't fly them in bad weather. And indeed, on the day that we were doing this little day out for the children, it was in Oxfordshire. The fog hung down to about 2 meters above our heads, so the drone just disappeared. No one could see it, which was very disappointing for the children because they couldn't pretend to have a go at playing with it. So we don't use drones much, but they can be really good tools for engaging young people because they're fascinated by the technology. And of course, once you have this churchyard plan, it's not just a case of adding factual data about whatever may be in the churchyard. You can start to create tours of things of interest, tell stories around gravestones, around flora and fauna of your churchyard, creating little churchyard trails. And you can use the map to do that, and the database to pull that stuff out, pull stories together, and explore these absolutely fascinating places. So finally, I just want to give a real high five to the volunteers who have helped us to get where we are, because although we have had the help from national agencies, and we are a national agency ourselves with some resources, we really couldn't have got started without the help of volunteers and partner organizations. And one of the pilot projects that we used to prove the concept of what we were doing with the ground survey with Atlantic Geomatics, that you could get people involved, that it could be interesting, exciting, and it could actually be finished, was at Kirkburton and Shelley in West Yorkshire, where HLF, as it then was, Heritage Lottery Fund, gave a very generous grant to pay for Atlantic Geomatics to make a record, a very comprehensive record. They did everything pretty much of very huge churchyards, which was really, really fascinating. Kirkburton churchyard in particular is a huge rambling thing. And local volunteers had already done some of the work, which made it very much easier for them. And then once they'd done the basic professional surveying, these volunteers came flooding in to help out, clearing weeds away from some of the graves very carefully, recording them where the surveyors hadn't been able to get to them, adding to the record, adding stories. And it was just a fantastic project. And we had a press release around that. Many people came, Lord Lieutenants, the local primary school got involved, school children got involved in the project. And we even had a splash in the national press about this, and we wondered what they would make of the story. And of course they said, Google for graves. It was in the Times and the Daily Mail. This all happened just before lockdown, just before the very first lockdown. So that was when we were launching, and we've been kind of delayed for a year. But this project really proved that it could be done, and it proved how valuable it can be and how it can really enrich people's lives. From some of the more elderly retired people who had the time to do this kind of clearing and recording, to the school children from the village who perhaps had lost some contact with their local village church. And this really got them not only into the churchyard, but into the church. And they started to develop all sorts of interesting projects. And if you want to look at the basic map, which would be the freebie, if you like, that Atlantic Geomatics will produce without you having to subscribe to it, then there's the link. You're obviously going to get a copy of this, so you don't have to scribble furiously. But if you look there, you will see a kind of a dummy. It is a pretty simple dummy of how the plan looks and what you can do, how you can play with it. It just has burials on it at the moment. It doesn't have, you can see trees and all the rest of it. It doesn't have any details about those. So that's a very basic dummy that we put up just so that people can have a look and see what kind of thing is on offer before we start this work, hopefully next month in earnest. So to finish up, the National Burial Ground Survey is rolling and it's coming your way. We will do it diocese for diocese, and we think, because we now have the data, we know how many hectares we have to survey, we know how far apart they are, and we know a number of other basic details about them, whether they're well looked after, closed, etc., their condition. We know that this national survey at this level of every single tree, gravestone, flower, everything within a churchyard will take us at least 7 years. So it may be that these people with their Doctor Who backpacks won't be turning up immediately, depending on which diocese you're in. But we're starting off in the Midlands and the Northwest and moving around the country. So I will be very happy to, if anyone wants their diocese to be involved and has any say in the matter, wants them to be pushed towards the front of the queue, please get in touch with me. We may be able to adjust the order that we're doing them in. We've got sort of first tranche, second tranche, third tranche at the moment, but we can vary that depending on enthusiasm and resources. So I think probably, yeah, just about. Oh, that is my last slide. So Catherine, I will stop sharing.
But you've already had a bid in the chat for Leicestershire.
Okay.
So I bet they're going to get bids this afternoon. That was absolutely fascinating. I've heard you talk about it before, but I just hadn't realised quite how much has gone into this over how many years to get to this point. It's absolutely fascinating. There's quite a few questions in the Q&A. So just to say to everyone, if you look into the Q&A, if you click the thumbs up next to the questions you're most interested in, those are the ones that will make it to the top. Or if your question isn't on there, then please do add it to the list. Let's just begin with the one at the top, Joe, that's from Pete, that says, is the digitising of burial records a service that every records office in the country offers?
Now that is a very good question. Digitisation of burial records has happened piecemeal across the country over the last probably 20 odd years, as long as I've been doing this. And a rather sort of hodgepodge of commercial companies have at various times digitized those records for the county record offices who have generally not had the resources to do it themselves. There's generally been a deal involved in that with some money. And it does mean that sometimes there are very high quality digital records already there. And sometimes it means they're on microfiche, or that slidey stuff where you get seasick when you're looking at it in libraries. So that situation is patchy. And actually the reason that we have chosen some of our first dioceses is that we not only have keen dioceses, we have keen county record offices. Because actually if the records have to be digitized again, then space has to be created, staff have to be allocated to that within the record offices. So there's quite a bit of work to be done there. So we're starting with it's not just potluck. We have started with the dioceses where that was easiest, where people sort of, as people are doing in the chat now, they put their hands up, because each diocese has an individual deal with its record office as well. So there's some negotiations to be done there. Between the commercial companies, the record offices, and the diocese, and ourselves with this survey, and that's why it's sort of staggered. That's a very long-winded way of saying that sometimes a lot of work will have to be done, sometimes it won't be very much. We actually don't do that. We've got nothing to do with that. The survey on the ground has nothing to do with that. So to some extent, individual parishes don't have to worry about that. Yeah.
I'm just noticing somebody's put in the chat, please may we see the questions in the Q&A. I think you can. I've clicked the right thing that should allow you all to see the Q&A. If somebody would helpfully write in the chat whether they can see them, because it'll be a lot easier for you to upvote if you can see them. Right, let me mark that one as done. So the next question at the top, well, it's phrased as, can you say if Coventry are in the first tranche? But maybe there's a broader question as, how would somebody find out where they are in the 7-year queue?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually only got sent the sort of prioritized map myself last week. And there is some negotiations going on about that, but we would hope that we can publish a timeline very soon. And we're probably going to do that when the first one starts. Carlisle has been started. They've done I think it's done about 50 churches in Carlisle Diocese, but they want to roll that out as quickly as possible. We don't want to raise people's hopes because they've been dashed before with COVID, of course, with the timing. We would have started a year ago if it hadn't been for COVID. And of course, we're not totally sure that we're going to be able to start swarming out after June the 21st as we plan to yet. But it's a very good question, and we will look once we've got it fixed. And if there's people in the chat saying they want to be involved, I shall take that back, and it may be that people get bumped up. But yes, we'll seek to do that, and then we'll be open to bidders for people who want to be accelerated, as it were. But there are some of those discussions with record offices are part of the mix with which ones we do first and second and third, if you like.
Yeah, because you need to know that the digital records are there to link up with.
Yeah.
A similar question: which list is Ely on? Similar answer to that one, so I'll tick that one off.
The diocese has indicated it's very keen already. Yeah.
The next question, well, I think this is related as well. It says our church was in touch with people from Atlantic Geomatics and they thought it would take 8 years. So I think you've covered that I think it'll be 7 years, and when the lists are determined, then those will be sent out to dioceses so that they know where they are in the queue. The next question is from Pete. Is this going to be linked to the various family history websites that currently exist? They will love it, and you might get money for it too.
We are getting money for it too. Well, we are not, but some money is being provided by some of these companies who shall remain nameless to fund much of the work. So family history societies, I don't actually know exactly which ones are involved, but there is a consortium of societies who are involved, and we will never deny access to the data we produce to the public. But clearly some websites from these family history societies or from genealogy societies, we all know what they're called, charge for access to their resources, and that's their privilege. We can't do anything about that. But yes, we've already been working with several of the county family history societies. We often find that people have done some digitization of records already, but it is often the case we can't use it because it's not good enough quality compared to what one can do now. So even where records have sometimes been digitized, it's better to do them again because you've got OCR technology, which allows you to search, and it's easier to make an inventory if and the technology is advancing so fast. As I say, we couldn't have done this 5 years ago. Yeah.
I'm assuming OCR is optical character recognition. So,
yes.
So reading what's written rather than just photographing it.
Yeah. So reading what's written and being able to, sort of search using those facilities. Obviously, if it's microfiche, you can't do that.
The next question is from Nicola, and it says, is this just for burial grounds or also for land without burials around a church?
We recorded all curtilage of all churches. So on our database, it will say churchyard, no burials. Although that's sometimes a dangerous thing because you find out the vicar's buried under the porch and, the first vicar or something and didn't record it properly. We have come across that in the past. But we have recorded all churchyard curtilages because for that very reason, you can never know. Sometimes it turns out that you've got a car park, that's being used as a sort of municipal car park, but it was a burial ground once. Where possible, we've done the research as much as we could, but with recording 18,000 burial grounds, there's a limit to how much research you can do up front. We will be working with the dioceses going forward to hone that data to get so that they can say, actually, we know that. With HS2 going through Manchester, we suddenly found a burial ground we didn't know about that HS2 is going to go straight through. So the map is constantly evolving as local people add their knowledge to it.
And let me just check, because there's two different things out there. There's the Church Heritage Record, and then there's the Atlantic Geomatics coming and doing that really detailed survey. Are non-burial curtilages, are they included in both or just on the Church Heritage Record?
No, they won't be surveying ones that there's no point in surveying something that's just a green blob. It's been a waste of time because we already have the boundaries of the curtilage. So we've done that for the nation, if you like. and they will only survey ones where there's something to record. Yeah.
Cool. The next question from Nicola: Will the owners of the land, the Church of England, allow all veteran trees to be recorded? Permission is needed for veteran tree inventory.
Yeah, well, we don't compile the veteran tree inventory. That's done, I believe, by the Woodlands Trust. We don't do that. There are various bodies, I think, who there's the Ancient Yews and things like that. We just link to that data. We don't create that data. It's not up to us to do that. We don't have the staff to do that. So basically, we're collaborating with whoever wants to collaborate with us.
So we import the data as complete as it exists.
Yeah. And of course, if people doing the surveys find who really know their stuff, make new finds of whatever it is, new veteran trees or that aren't known about, then that can be verified by whichever is the relevant body and added. So I should say that our map is the statutory map, if you like. That's got the statutory designations or the semi-statutory designations on it. So that's a planning tool, and that's verified accurate data. What Atlantic Geomatics does is the working version, if you like, that the parish can change. So we keep that at slightly arm's length, but there is an interplay between the two in that certain data will be passed as a summary to the Church Heritage Record. For example, they're recording the earliest burial to the latest burial and things like that, and we get a summary of that verifiable data. But there is a bit of a firewall between the two.
The next question is from Alison, who says, this is an amazing project. How do you see it relating to the Church of England parish mapping tool and the more recent Good Steward mapping project? So that's the map that was started by the Housing Commission work. How do they interrelate or not interrelate?
Well, we were involved in that, so we provided some of the data to help with that. So we're working with all our colleagues at the NCIs and in dioceses who have done data collection. Well, my ambition would be to have the map of everything that our map would just be part of, that would map all our land, all the Church of England's land, Commissioner's land, etc. I don't think any of that is in any way secret. But obviously that would be an excellent tool for the management of our resource, and I know, Catherine, that you're particularly interested in that in terms of land use and carbon capture and all that kind of thing. So that's not my bailiwick. I don't have any power to tell anyone what to do in that respect. But again, we offer our services to help join things up as much as we can.
And I think it would be right to say that the other tool that Alison's mentioning covers Church Commissioner land, glebe land, and schools and churchyards, whereas what you're describing is just churchyards, but what you're describing is in an inordinate amount more detail than would be in the mapping tool that has all of the big parcels of land.
Yeah, it's been checked as well. So when we check the basic data that you can get from the land registry or the ordnance survey, as I said at the beginning of my talk, it wasn't always correct. And we corrected it when we could. So what we've created is pretty accurate, I think. We've tried it out with a few dioceses because we're just rolling this out now, and it's very new, all of this, and they've been pretty pleased, and occasionally said, that one's whatever, changed, different, been sold to the Greek Orthodox or whatever it is, and something new's happened to it since, and that's great information. So we'll always be learning and always adding to it. But a lot of the data that we get, comes through the Research and Statistics Department at Church House. They're really the experts who have a lot of the base mapping and a lot of the data coming in from the diocese and the parishes. So we're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants when we're doing this work.
The next question is very similar to the previous ones. Is Truro on the list? You've got a lot of dioceses wanting to know where they are.
Well, I can tell you that Truro is penciled in as being one of the first tranche, yes, but we haven't talked to them in detail about it yet. That's next on my list, is to talk to Truro about this. Yes, they are.
That's tomorrow's job.
Yeah.
The next question says, who in the diocese links with the record office? Would you know that?
That is different from every diocese to every record office across the country. It's a very Church of England story. Some of the deals that have been made with record offices by dioceses were made in the mists of time, and there may be nobody at the diocese who can remember. Other dioceses have very direct and active relationships with their record office. It's often the diocesan secretary. The transfer of records from parishes to the diocese to county record offices was often done with the permission of the bishop. We found that sometimes each PCC was individually asked at the time, and sometimes they were not. And sometimes it doesn't seem like anyone was asked, just depending on when it was done. So it's a bit Wild West, and that's one of the reasons that we've got this first tranche, second tranche, third tranche. The first tranche is where it's clear and we know what we're dealing with, and we can move quite quickly on that. And then there are these other ones where it's not so clear, because you don't want to get in a situation where there's some litigation, and that's almost happened when, you know, we found that some commercial company has digitized the records of a diocese and they weren't aware, and that has caused a bit of a ruction locally. So we want to go carefully and gradually, you know, so that we don't cause anything like that. Generally, it's fine. And as I say, in the first tranche of dioceses, we've got clear blue water to sail into in those respects. But it's a long-winded answer to a simple question. It's very different across the country, is the answer.
42 different answers. So the base bit presumably is, if anybody on this webinar wants to find out, is to contact their diocesan secretary's office and see if they can find out the answer for their diocese.
Yeah, I think probably go through the DAC, because sometimes the DACs are on top, secretaries on top of this, and if they're not, they'll know who, and they'll pass you on.
Great. The next one just says, I'm so excited. Not really a question, but I'll read it out anyway because it'll make you smile. Right, the next question says, once Atlantic Geomatics have done the basic work, what are the on costs for a parish? I think you said that you didn't know, or that kind of wasn't information that you could share.
It will depend. Depend how big your churchyard is. So they have a costing thing. We don't have anything to do with that side of it. So that's a transaction, a commercial transaction between each parish, or maybe even a diocese if they decided to do it that way, and this commercial company. So our contract with Atlantic Geomatics is just to provide the free surveys. We're not paying them anything. No one's giving anybody any money. So it's a very sort of gentleman's contract, if you like. But the reason we've done this contract is what they get out of us is that we talk to dioceses, we talk to parishes to sort of convince them that it's a good idea to allow this to happen. And we also get all the data. So all the data is in a big digital bank. So if anything went wrong, you know, or the Atlantic Geomatics office was hit by a meteor strike or something, and they were removed or they went bust, or anything like that, or we fell out with them, you know, that happens in the world. We have that data, and we could take that data and give it to somebody else and build it again. We don't want to do that, we don't expect to do that, but we have that safety built in, and we hope that that means that parishes and dioceses will be reassured, you know, that when they do this, especially if they're paying some money for the subscription, their data and the ability to use it won't go up in a puff of smoke. We're behind it. We've got it, and we will always safeguard it for you.
I've got my eye on the clock because I'm sure everyone wants us to finish on time at 7 o'clock and get away for dinner. I'm actually going to leap down to the last question because it links nicely to telling you about a webinar we've got at the end of the week. The last question here is from Shu, says, this sounds absolutely fantastic. Can't wait for you to get round to East Sussex. Can we record the mushrooms and wildflowers, etc. on it too? Now for plants and species like that, that's better done through the National Biodiversity Network's portal, isn't it? Which is what people are doing for Churches Count on Nature. Yeah,
I mean, it may be that you spot them when you're doing a survey following the survey, you know, if you're doing some work following the survey. But yes, we are connected to the National Biodiversity Network Atlas. We're providing them with their mapping of the churchyards. So that's where that would go, yes. As I say, it may be that some excited volunteer spots some mushrooms and thinks that those are very, very special mushrooms and records it there, and then that would need to be verified. And I believe Caring for God's Acre has a role. I don't want to speak for them or give them jobs, but I believe they have a role in that verification process. And then it goes on, yes, the Atlas, the Biodiversity Network Atlas. So we're not, you know, necessarily collecting that information. We're just providing links, access to it.
And if you want to know more about that side of it, so biological recording of plants and species, come along to our webinar at 4 o'clock on Friday, all about biological recording. And Harriet Carty from Caring for God's Acre will tell you about how you can gather those records this week during Church's Count on Nature or at any time in the year, and then input them onto the National Biodiversity Network, which then flows through into the Church Heritage Record.
Sanctuary.
Sanctuary, it all joins up. That's 7 o'clock, so I want to bring us to a close. I'm conscious there are a few questions we haven't answered, but we have done the majority of them. Can I just say a big thank you to you, Joe, for such an interesting talk, and I'm sure people have been fascinated by it. You can see from the number of questions. So thank you so much for giving up your time and talking to us this evening. Thank you to everyone who's joined the webinar. I hope you found it really interesting, and I hope that you'll come along to one of our other webinars this week. Tomorrow I'll send you around the slides, I'll send you the links from the chat and the link through to our feedback form. I think that is everything. I will just save the links in the chat and then bring us to a close. Bye everyone.
Thank you for listening.